I thought marrying into power meant security. Instead, my own father-in-law, the CEO, gave me 5 minutes to clear my desk like I was nothing. I stood up alone, or so I thought, because before the elevator doors closed, 22 people made a choice that changed all our lives and exposed the truth money couldn't bury. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I still remember the hum of the lights that morning, the kind of quiet buzz you only notice when your heart is already beating too loud. I had been at my desk early, coffee untouched, scrolling through numbers that no longer surprised me. After 8 years at that company, I could read a quarterly report the way some people read palms. I knew where the trouble was before it showed up in red. What I didn't know was that none of it would matter in about an hour. When I married Daniel, people joked that I'd made it. His father, Richard Hale, was the CEO of Hale Systems, a regional giant with national ambition, the kind of company that had its name etched into glass lobbies and whispered with respect at industry dinners. I wasn't hired because of the marriage. That was important to me. I'd already been there 3 years, worked my way from analyst to operations lead long before Daniel ever proposed. Still, once the last name changed, everything about me did too, at least in the eyes of others. I learned early how to walk the thin line between proving I belonged and pretending I didn't care what anyone thought. I stayed late, I spoke carefully in meetings, I never used the family card even when it would have helped, especially then. And for a long time, I believed the work spoke for itself. That morning, my calendar showed a meeting I hadn't scheduled. No title, just a block of time and a location, Executive Conference Room B. That alone should have told me something was wrong. Richard never did anything without a title. He believed labels kept people in their place. I gathered my notebook, my pen, and that untouched coffee and walked down the hall past cubicles I'd helped design, teams I'd built from scratch. People smiled, a few waved, someone asked about the weekend barbecue we'd planned. I smiled back, answered automatically, unaware that I was already a ghost walking through a place that was done with me. Richard was already seated when I entered. No Daniel, no HR, just him, hands folded, suit pressed so sharply it looked like it could cut. He didn't stand, didn't offer a greeting. He looked at his watch. "Sit," he said. I did. He took a breath, the kind people take when they're about to deliver news they've already rehearsed. "I'm going to be direct," he said. "This isn't working anymore." At first, I truly thought he meant the company, or the market, or project. I nodded, waiting. "You've compromised objectivity," he continued. "Your presence here creates complications." My stomach tightened. "If this is about the merger team, I can step back." "This isn't a discussion," he cut in. "I've already made the decision." There it was. The air changed. I felt it before I understood it. "What decision?" I asked, though my voice was already giving me away. "I'm terminating your employment effective immediately." The words didn't land all at once. They dropped, one by one, like stones into water, ripples spreading outwards, slow and cruel. I waited for the rest, the explanation, the paperwork, the decency. Instead, he glanced at his watch again. "You have 5 minutes to clear your desk." I laughed, not because it was funny, because my body didn't know what else to do. 5 minutes? I repeated. "Richard, I've been here 8 years. "And that's 5 minutes longer than this conversation," he said. "Security will escort you out." I stood up, my legs shaky but my back straight. "Does Daniel know?" I asked, hating myself for needing to. Richard's expression didn't change. "My relationship with my son is not your concern." That told me everything. I walked out without another word, my ears ringing, my thoughts colliding. The hallway felt longer now, louder. Every step echoed like a countdown. I could almost hear the seconds slipping away. When I reached my desk, my hands moved on instinct. Laptop into the bag, notebook, a framed photo of me and Daniel before everything got complicated, a plant someone said I was the only one who could keep alive. I didn't look up. I couldn't. I felt eyes on me, questions forming, whispers starting to stir. "Hey," someone said softly. It was Marisol from logistics, her brow furrowed. "You okay?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. What do you say when your life just tilted off its axis? "I'm leaving," I said. She frowned. "Like, for the day?" I shook my head. The words spread faster than I expected. Chairs rolled back, screens dimmed, people stood. Someone asked if HR knew, someone else asked what happened. I didn't have answers. I barely had breath. At minute 4, a security guard appeared at the end of the aisle. I recognized him. We'd chatted about his daughter once. He looked embarrassed, like he wanted to disappear. "I've got it," I said quietly, lifting my bag. "I'm done." As I turned toward the elevator, something unexpected happened. Marisol picked up her bag. "Wait, if you're out, I'm out." I froze. "Don't be ridiculous," I whispered. "You have a mortgage." She smiled sadly. "So do you." Then Jamal stood, then Priya, then Alex from IT, who never spoke in meetings but always fixed things before anyone noticed they were broken. One by one, people I'd hired, mentored, fought for began shutting down the computers. "What are you doing?" I whispered, panic rising now for a different reason. "Following our lead, the one we trust." The security guard shifted uncomfortably. His radio crackled. I saw managers peeking out of offices, disbelief etched across their faces. By the time we reached the elevators, there were 22 of us, 22 people who had just chosen uncertainty over silence. The doors closed, sealing us in together. No one spoke at first. Then someone laughed, a shaky, disbelieving sound. Someone else wiped their eyes. I stared at the numbers as they descended, my reflection staring back at me, stunned and unrecognizable. I had walked in alone. I was walking out with an army I never knew I had. I didn't know then what it would cost all of us, or what it would expose, or how far Richard would go to protect his empire. All I knew was that 5 minutes had just rewritten my life, and it was only the beginning. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have, like the building itself was trying to make us reconsider. 22 of us packed inside, shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same recycled air, each lost in our own version of panic. I kept thinking someone would stop the doors, that this was a mistake, that Richard would suddenly remember my years of service, my loyalty, my marriage to his son. But nothing happened. The doors opened and daylight spilled in like an accusation. We walked out together, past the front desk, where the receptionist's smile faltered when she saw us all. I wanted to tell her it wasn't contagious, that she wasn't required to be brave today. Outside, the cold hit my face, sharp and grounding. For a moment, no one knew what to do next. We just stood there, a cluster of people who had just detonated their own routines. "I didn't plan this," I said, finally turning to them, my voice cracked. "I never would have asked any of you to—" "We know," Priya said gently. "That's why we did it." Phones were already buzzing, Slack messages, emails, missed calls from managers who had suddenly realized the floor was on fire. I ignored mine. I needed air. I needed to think. I needed to understand how my life had fractured so quickly. We drifted apart slowly, promises to talk later, to check in, to figure things out together. When I got into my car, my hand shook so badly I had to sit there for a full minute before I could turn the key. That's when my phone rang again. Daniel. I answered, my throat tight. "Did you know?" I asked, skipping hello. There was a pause, the kind that tells you everything before the words come. "I just found out," he said. "My dad told me 10 minutes ago." 10 minutes ago, which meant he'd fired me first, then informed his son like it was a weather update. I closed my eyes. "He gave me 5 minutes," I said. "Security." Daniel swore under his breath. "That's not okay." "No," I said quietly. "It's not." "I'm coming home," he said. "We'll talk." Home. The word felt strange now. Our house had always felt like neutral ground, but suddenly I wondered how much of it was built on his father's money, his influence, his unspoken expectations. When I pulled into the driveway later, Daniel was already there, pacing. He pulled me into a hug the moment I stepped out of the car. For a second, I let myself sink into it, let myself be held. Then the questions came, tumbling out between us. What happened? What was said? Why now? He said I was a complication, I told him, that my presence compromised objectivity. Daniel laughed bitterly. That's rich, coming from the man who's never hired anyone he didn't already know. "Did you know this was coming?" I asked again, needing to hear it. "No," he said firmly. "I swear. He's been different lately, paranoid. The board's been pressuring him, revenue's down more than he'll admit." That caught my attention. Down how much? Daniel hesitated. "Enough that he's been looking for someone to blame." And there it was. The shape of it began to form. I'd overseen operations during the most volatile year the company had faced. I'd flagged issues. I'd pushed back on shortcuts. I'd documented everything. If someone wanted a scapegoat, I was convenient, disposable, especially if firing me sent a message about ethics. My phone buzzed again, a text from Marisol. "We're meeting tonight. You should come." I showed Daniel. He nodded. "You should go," he said. "They need you." "So do I said softly. He met my eyes. "I'm on your side, even if that means standing up to my father." That was easy to say in the kitchen, with the lights warm and the future still abstract. I didn't know then how hard he would be tested. The meeting was at a small bar near the office, the kind with sticky tables and dim lighting that made everyone look a little braver. One by one they arrived. Some looked determined, others terrified, all of them unemployed technically, or about to be. "I didn't plan this," Jamal clarified once we were seated. "Some of us were escorted out. Some were told to take the rest of the day. HR is already spinning it." "Spinning it how?" I asked. "That you orchestrated a walkout, that you leveraged personal relationships to destabilize the company." I felt a familiar anger rise, hot and bitter. "Of course they are." "And," Priya added, "they're asking questions about projects you touched, audits." I went still. "Audits?" "They're looking for something, anything." I knew then that this wasn't just about getting rid of me. This was about erasing me, discrediting my work so completely that no one would question the narrative, that the walkout would look like rebellion, not integrity. "What do we do?" someone asked. I looked around the table at faces I cared about, people who had trusted me. I told them the truth, but we do it carefully. Over the next few days, my life became a blur of calls, meetings, and documents. Former colleagues sent screenshots, forwarded emails, timelines. Patterns emerged, decisions Richard had overridden, warnings he'd ignored, risks he'd taken quietly, hoping the numbers would catch up before anyone noticed. And then there was the non-compete. The envelope arrived by courier, thick and smug. Inside was a legal threat dressed up as a severance agreement. Sign, and I'd get 3 months' pay. Speak out, and I'd be sued into silence. Daniel read it with his jaw clenched. "He's trying to scare you," he said. "It's working," I admitted. "He has more resources than I ever will." That night, Daniel went to see his father. He came home hours later, pale and quiet. He said if you don't sign, he'll make sure you never work in this industry again, and if I interfere, he'll cut me off, financially, professionally. I stared at the wall, absorbing the weight of that threat. "What did he say?" I asked. Sat beside me. "I said I married you, not his company." I took his hand, grateful and terrified in equal measure. The next morning, I got an email from the board. They wanted to talk. Apparently, 22 people walking out had raised questions no amount of spin could fully smother. Investors were nervous, clients were calling, and someone somewhere had started connecting dots. As I prepared for that meeting, I realized something with startling clarity. Richard had given me 5 minutes to disappear. Instead, he'd given me a platform, and I wasn't going to waste it. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, which gave me 4 sleepless nights to replay every decision I'd ever made at Hale Systems. I kept thinking about how power works, how quietly it moves, how it convinces you that staying silent is the same thing as being smart. Richard had built his empire on that silence. I had survived there by learning when to speak and when to document. Now those habits were about to collide. Daniel offered to come with me, but I told him no, not because I didn't want his support, but because I needed this to be clean, uncomplicated. If the board saw him as a proxy for his father, everything I said would be suspect. He understood, even if it hurt. The conference room the board used wasn't the one with glass walls and inspirational quotes. It was older, deeper in the building, designed for conversations that weren't meant to travel. 7 people sat around the table when I arrived, some familiar, some not. Richard was there too, of course, at the far end, hands folded, expression neutral. He didn't look at me. "Thank you for coming on short notice," the chairwoman said. "We'll get straight to it. Your termination has raised concerns." That was diplomatic language for panic. I nodded. "I imagine it has." She gestured for me to speak. For a moment, I felt the weight of every eye in the room. Then I remembered the faces in the elevator, the way 22 people had chosen truth over comfort. I took a breath. "I didn't orchestrate a walkout," I said. "I was fired without warning and given 5 minutes to leave. What happened afterward was a response to that decision." Richard shifted slightly, the only sign of irritation he allowed himself. "The concern," another board member said, "is that you may have had motive to destabilize operations." I had motive to do my job and to protect the company from decisions that were putting it at risk. That got their attention. I laid it all out, the rushed contracts, the deferred maintenance, the forecasts that had been quietly altered before reaching the board. I didn't editorialize. I didn't accuse. I presented timelines, emails, reports. I showed them the patterns they'd been too busy to see. Richard interrupted once. "These are interpretations," he said coolly. "Operations doesn't have full visibility into executive strategy." I met his gaze for the first time. Then executive strategy shouldn't require erasing operational warnings. The room went very quiet. When I finished, the chairwoman thanked me and said they'd be in touch. No promises, no absolution, just that careful corporate calm that masks upheaval. As I stood to leave, Richard spoke again. "You've made your point," he said. "I hope it was worth it." I looked at him, really looked, and felt something surprising. Not fear, not anger, pity. "We'll see," I said. The fallout was slow at first, then sudden. Internal reviews became external audits. Projects were paused. A few executives took personal leave. The press got wind of internal disagreements. Nothing had my name on it, but everything traced back to that day. Meanwhile, the 22 were scattered, job hunting, anxious. We stayed in touch through a group chat that oscillated between dark humor and mutual reassurance. I felt responsible for them in a way that went beyond professionalism. They'd risked their livelihoods on a belief in me. I couldn't let that be for nothing. Then came the call from an investigative journalist. She'd received an anonymous tip with documents attached. My documents, or copies of them. Someone on the inside had decided to accelerate the reckoning. "She just wants to understand the human side," she said, "what it felt like." I hesitated. The non-compete loomed, the threats, Daniel's future. But then I thought about silence again, about how it protects the wrong people. "I'll talk," I said, on background. The story broke 2 weeks later, Carefully worded, fact-checked to exhaustion. It didn't name me, but it didn't need to. Anyone who knew the company knew. Investors demanded answers. The board announced an independent review of leadership practices. Richard didn't come home for Sunday dinner that week. At home, the strain showed in smaller ways. Daniel stopped sleeping through the night. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from cousins, uncles, family friends who suddenly had opinions about loyalty. One evening, he admitted what I was afraid to ask. "My dad says you're tearing the family apart," he said quietly. I took his hand. "Do you believe that?" He shook his head. "I think the cracks were already there." That was the truth of it. You can't tear down something that's solid by telling the truth. You can only expose what was already failing. The board called me back in early December. Richard wasn't there this time. They offered me a settlement, a real one, not hush money, but acknowledgement, a public statement clarifying that my termination was procedural, not performance-related. It wasn't justice, but it was a start. I asked one question: what happens to the people who left? The chairwoman exchanged looks with the others. "We're exploring reinstatement options," she said, "or placement assistance." I smiled, a little sadly. They deserve more than options. When I left that meeting, my phone lit up. Marisol, Jamal, Priya. One by one, they'd been contacted. Some offered their jobs back. Some chose to move on. All of them thanked me. The last call of the day was from Richard. I almost didn't answer. "You've made your statement," he said without preamble. "Now it's time to stop." I stopped being quiet, not being honest. There was a long pause. "You've cost me a great deal," he said. "So did you," I said softly. He hung up. That night, Daniel and I sat on the couch, the house finally quiet. "Whatever happens next," he said, "we'll handle it together." I leaned into him, exhausted but clear. I didn't know what my career would look like. I didn't know what his relationship with his father would become. But I knew this: 5 minutes taught me who I was and who I wasn't willing to be. And sometimes that's the beginning of something better. The weeks after the board's settlement offer felt strangely hollow. For so long, my life had been driven by urgency, emails, deadlines, crises stacked on top of each other. Now there was space, too much of it. Silence has a way of magnifying doubt, and I found myself replaying every choice, wondering if I'd mistaken survival for victory. Daniel went back to work at a satellite office, intentionally distant from headquarters. Officially, it was to support transitional leadership. Unofficially, it was exile. He didn't complain, but I saw the cost in the way his shoulders sagged when he came home, and how often he stared at nothing, lost in thoughts he didn't share. The family dinners stopped, not gradually, all at once. One Sunday, we simply weren't invited. The group chat went quiet. Holidays loomed like open wounds. I took consulting work where I could, short-term contracts that valued my experience but kept me at arm's length. No one wanted to antagonize Hale's systems outright, not yet. The industry has a long memory, and fear is an efficient teacher. One afternoon, I met Marisol for coffee. She looked lighter somehow, freer. "I took a job with a startup," she said, smiling. "Less pay, more honesty." "I'm proud of you," I said, and meant it. She hesitated, then reached across the table. "You know we don't blame you, right?" "I know," I said, "but knowing and feeling are different things." That night, I received an email from the board chairwoman. Richard had stepped down. The announcement framed it as a planned retirement, years of service praised, legacy preserved. But the timing told the real story. Pressure had finally outweighed pride. Daniel read the email twice, then set his phone down. "I don't know how to feel," he admitted. "You don't have to know. You just have to feel it." Richard didn't call, not that night, not the next. When he finally did, weeks later, his voice was unfamiliar, smaller. "I built that company from nothing," he said. "I thought control was the same as protection." I listened, not interrupting. He continued, "I wanted to keep it safe for the family." "For yourself," I said gently. He sighed. "Maybe." We didn't reconcile, not really, but something shifted. The war ended, even if peace was still a distant concept. Spring came quietly. Daniel and I started talking about the future in tentative ways. What did we want outside of the gravity of his father's shadow? One evening, over takeout and cheap wine, Daniel said something that surprised me. "What if we moved?" he asked. "Moved where?" "Somewhere neutral," he said, "where our names don't mean anything." The idea took root. We sold the house, downsized, let go of things we'd once thought were permanent. I accepted a leadership role at a mid-sized firm 2 states away, one that valued transparency because it had nearly been destroyed by its absence. On my last day in town, the 22 gathered one more time. Not all of them. Life had scattered us, but enough. We toasted to endings and beginnings, to courage we didn't know we had. "I still can't believe you all walked out with me," I said, my voice thick. Jamal grinned. "You didn't give us much choice. You taught us what leadership looks like." As we hugged goodbye, I felt something close to closure. Months later, settled into our new life, I received a handwritten note. No return address, just a few lines. "You were right. I hope one day you'll forgive me. R." I folded it carefully and put it away. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't a single act. It's a process, one I was finally ready to begin. Looking back, I understand now that power doesn't reveal who you are. Loss does. Being given 5 minutes to clear my desk stripped away every illusion I'd been holding on to. What remained was truth, integrity, and the quiet knowledge that when the moment came, I didn't stand alone. 22 people stood with me, and that made all the difference. The new city didn't welcome us with fireworks or instant belonging. It arrived slowly, in small moments that felt almost too ordinary to matter. A barista remembering Daniel's order, a neighbor waving without asking questions, streets where no one knew our last name or cared what it once opened or closed. At first, that anonymity felt like loss. Then, it started to feel like oxygen. My new role came with a title that sounded impressive, but I was careful not to let that seduce me again. I listened more than I spoke in those first months. I learned who carried quiet resentment, who had been ignored too long, who flinched at sudden emails because they'd learned that silence often preceded blame. I recognized those signs. I knew what they grew into if left unattended. One afternoon, during a routine operations review, a junior manager hesitated before speaking. Her voice shook when she challenged a timeline the executive team was pushing. The room went still. I saw the old reflex ripple through the table, discomfort, impatience, the unspoken desire to move on. "Tell me more," I said. She blinked, surprised. Then she did. She laid out risks no one else had wanted to acknowledge. When she finished, I thanked her. We adjusted the plan. After the meeting, she stopped by my office. "No one's ever backed me up like that," she said. I smiled. "Someone once did that for me." The past didn't disappear just because we'd moved. It showed up in unexpected ways. A familiar name in an industry article, a rumor passed along at a conference, and sometimes, late at night when Daniel and I lay awake listening to the quiet, it showed up in the spaces where family used to be. He still talked to his mother, carefully. Holidays were negotiated, divided, softened. Richard remained a distant presence, more symbol than man. When Daniel spoke of him, it was with a mix of grief and relief that mirrored my own feelings about the company I'd given so much of myself to. One evening, Daniel admitted something he'd been carrying. "I used to think my dad was unbreakable," he said. "Watching him fall, it scared me." "It scared me too," I said, "but not because he fell, because of how long no one was allowed to see the cracks." The truth is, I missed parts of my old life. I missed the certainty, the structure, the way success had once seemed measurable, quantifiable. But I didn't miss the fear, the careful calculations, the way my worth had been tethered to someone else's approval. About a year after we moved, I received an email from Alex. He'd started his own consultancy, focused on ethical systems design. "You should come see what we're building," he wrote. "It started with that elevator ride." I flew out the following month. His office was small, chaotic, alive. People argued openly, respectfully. Mistakes were named early, not hidden. Watching it all unfold, I felt a swell of pride that surprised me with its intensity. Over dinner, Alex raised a glass. "To 5 minutes," he said. We laughed, but it wasn't bitter anymore. It was reverent. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I thought about how easily the story could have ended differently, how close I'd come to signing away my voice for a sense of safety, how tempting it had been to disappear quietly, to let the narrative be written without me. The moral of this story isn't that walking out is always the right choice. It's not. It's that integrity has a cost, and silence has one too. You pay either way. The difference is what you keep. I kept my name. I kept my marriage, not because it was easy, but because it was honest. And I kept the knowledge that leadership isn't granted by titles or inherited through blood. It's earned in moments when doing the right thing feels like standing on the edge of a cliff with no guarantee of landing. Sometimes you jump anyway. 5 minutes changed my life, not because I was fired, but because 22 people reminded me that dignity is contagious, that courage multiplies, that when one person refuses to bow quietly, others remember they don't have to either. If you're listening to this and you're standing at your own desk, metaphorical or otherwise, wondering whether to stay silent or speak up, I won't tell you what to do, but I'll tell you this. You are not as alone as you think. And sometimes the door closing behind you is the first sound of something opening ahead. Time has a strange way of smoothing sharp edges without erasing the shape of the cut. 2 years passed before I realized I could walk into a corporate lobby again without my chest tightening. 2 years before I stopped scanning rooms for exits, before the sound of an elevator bell didn't send my thoughts spiraling back to that day. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, incremental, built out of mornings where I woke up and didn't immediately brace myself for impact. Daniel changed too. Away from his father's orbit, he became lighter, more himself. He took risks he'd never allowed before, challenged ideas without checking whether they aligned with a legacy he hadn't chosen. One night, after a long walk through our neighborhood, he said something that stayed with me. "I used to think strength meant endurance," he said. "Now I think it means choosing." Choosing. That word followed me into my work, my friendships, my sense of self. I chose transparency, even when it slowed things down. I chose to mentor instead of manage, to ask instead of assume. And I chose over and over not to become hardened by what I'd been through. Then the email came. It was from someone I didn't recognize at first, a woman named Elaine, recently appointed interim CEO at Hale Systems, Richard's successor. Her message was brief, respectful, and unexpected. She wanted to meet, off the record. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to delete it, to leave that chapter sealed. Another part, quieter but steadier, knew this was unfinished business of a different kind. We met in a neutral city in a hotel conference room with no logos and no history. Elaine was younger than I'd expected, sharp-eyed, composed. She didn't waste time. I've spent the last 6 months untangling a culture that rewarded silence and punished honesty, she said. Your name comes up a lot. I folded my hands. Usually as a warning, I imagine. As a turning point, she corrected. I won't pretend the company didn't fail you. It did. But I'm trying to understand how. I spoke carefully, not to protect them, but to respect myself. I talked about systems, incentives, fear, about how good people learn to look away when looking directly feels too dangerous. She listened, took notes, asked questions that showed she wasn't looking for absolution, only understanding. At the end of the meeting, she surprised me again. I'd like you to consider joining our advisory council, she said, independent with full autonomy. I almost laughed. You realize the irony. I do, she said. That's why it matters. I told her I'd think about it. When I told Daniel, he was quiet for a long moment. What do you want to do? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to help make sure what happened never happens again. Another part doesn't want to reopen old wounds. He nodded. Both can be true. In the end, I declined, not out of bitterness, but clarity. My work now was elsewhere. My energy was finite, and I wanted to spend it building, not repairing what had been built on a foundation I didn't choose. Elaine respected that. She sent a final note thanking me for my honesty. I wished her well and meant it. That winter, we hosted our first holiday dinner in the new house. Friends crowded the table, laughter spilling into the kitchen. At one point, I stepped back and watched the scene unfold, struck by how different it looked from the life I'd once thought was the pinnacle of success. No power, no prestige, just connection, warmth. Enough. Later that night, as we washed dishes together, Daniel said, I got a message from my dad. I paused. Do you want to talk about it? He said he's been volunteering, Daniel said, almost incredulous, mentoring small business owners. He said he doesn't know who he is without the company. I considered that. Neither did I once. Do you think people really change? Daniel asked. I think they can, I said slowly, if losing what they thought defined them doesn't destroy them first. Spring brought an unexpected invitation. A conference on ethical leadership wanted me to speak. The topic? Walking away. I stood on that stage, lights warm, audience quiet, and told a room of strangers about 5 minutes that changed my life. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't villainize anyone. I told the truth as plainly as I could. Afterward, a young man approached me, his eyes bright with something like fear and hope tangled together. I'm supposed to fire someone tomorrow, he said, and it feels wrong. I didn't tell him what to do. I told him what it costs not to listen to that feeling. He thanked me. I watched him walk away, wondering what choice he'd make. That's the thing about stories like this. They don't end cleanly. They echo. They ripple outward into lives you'll never fully see. 5 minutes didn't just change my life. They changed 22 careers, a company, a family, and maybe, quietly, someone else's moment of decision somewhere down the line. I used to think closure meant everything, being resolved. Now I know it means being at peace with what isn't. I am. Because when the door closed behind me that day, I didn't lose myself. I found myself. There's a moment that comes after upheaval, after the dust settles and the adrenaline fades, when you're forced to ask yourself a quieter question. Not what happened, but who did I become because of it? For a long time, I avoided that question. It felt too big, too reflective, like staring into still water and waiting to see what stared back. But eventually, life slowed enough that I couldn't avoid it anymore. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. I was sitting in my office reviewing a proposal when I noticed my hands were steady. That sounds insignificant, but it wasn't. For years, my body had carried tension I hadn't consciously acknowledged. Meetings meant bracing, decisions meant anticipating backlash, even success felt provisional, like it could be revoked at any moment. That day, for the first time in a long while, I realized I wasn't waiting for something bad to happen. That's when I understood how deeply that old environment had shaped me. Daniel noticed the change before I did. "You laugh more," he said one evening as we cooked dinner. "Not the polite kind, the real kind." "I think I'm finally exhaling," I said. He smiled. "I like this version of us." Work continued to evolve in unexpected ways. People sought me out not just for strategy, but for perspective. I became known as someone who would tell the truth without humiliating you, who would challenge decisions without undermining people. It wasn't a brand I'd planned, but it was one I was proud of. Then one afternoon, I received a message that stopped me cold. It was from someone named Claire. She'd worked at Hale Systems years ago in a department far removed from mine. We'd never met. "I heard your story at the conference," she wrote. "I wish I'd heard it sooner. I stayed quiet when I shouldn't have. I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered." I stared at the screen, blinking back tears. That was the thing about telling the truth. You never know who it reaches or when. Not all echoes were gentle. Occasionally, someone from the old world would surface with bitterness barely concealed. A former executive muttered at an industry event that I'd burned bridges. A recruiter cautioned that I was a risk. I learned to let those words pass through me instead of lodging in my chest. Risk, I'd realized, was relative. Staying had been a risk too, one I'd just grown accustomed to. Daniel's relationship with his father remained complicated. They spoke occasionally, cautiously. Richard never apologized outright. He circled the truth, brushed against it, retreated. I didn't push. Apologies extracted under pressure rarely heal anyone. One afternoon, Daniel came home holding an old photo album. "I found this at my mom's," he said. We sat on the floor, flipping through pages. There was Richard, younger, smiling in a way I'd never seen. There was Daniel as a child, perched on his shoulders, both of them laughing. It softened something in me. "He wasn't always like this," Daniel said quietly. "I know," I replied. "Power changes people, but so does fear." That night I dreamed of the office again. Not the firing, not the elevator, just my desk, bathed in morning light. When I woke, I felt calm. The dream didn't pull me at it the way it used to. It felt like a place I'd once lived, not a place I was trapped. Another year passed. I was invited to join the board of a nonprofit focused on workplace accountability. At first, I hesitated. Boards carried a certain irony for me, but this one felt different. Grassroots, mission-driven, uninterested in optics. At our first meeting, a young woman spoke hesitantly about reporting misconduct at her previous job. "I thought if I just kept my head down, it would pass," she said. I recognized myself in her words. I leaned forward. "It never just passes," I said gently. "It only moves to someone else." She nodded, eyes shining with recognition, and in that moment I understood something profound. My story no longer belonged just to me. It had become a bridge. Daniel and I celebrated our anniversary quietly that year. No big gestures, just a handwritten note he left on my pillow. "Thank you for choosing yourself. It gave me permission to do the same." I folded it carefully and tucked it away, knowing I'd return to it when doubt crept in, as it sometimes still did. On the anniversary of the day I was fired, I took the afternoon off. I walked through a park near our home, leaves crunching underfoot. I thought about the woman I'd been that morning, coffee untouched, trusting the system she'd given her loyalty to. I wished I could reach back through time and tell her something. "You're stronger than you think, and what you're about to lose is not the thing that defines you." But maybe she needed to learn it the hard way. Maybe I did. That evening, the group chat lit up. The 22, not all active anymore, but still there. Someone had posted a photo from that day outside the building. We stood close together, faces tight with uncertainty. Underneath, Jamal wrote, "Still the bravest thing I've ever done." I typed back before I could overthink it. Me too. As the night settled in, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude without bitterness, pride without defensiveness, peace without resignation. 5 minutes had meant to erase me. Instead, they etched a line I would never cross again. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. When people in power rush you out the door, it's often because they're afraid of what you might do if you're allowed to stay. I walked out anyway, and I kept walking. As the years added quiet layers to our life, the story I once thought defined me began to feel more like a chapter than a title. People still asked about it sometimes, usually in hushed tones, as if betrayal were contagious. I learned to answer without flinching, not because it didn't matter anymore, but because it no longer owned me. One autumn afternoon, I received an invitation that made me sit back in my chair and breathe slowly before responding. Hale Systems was hosting a public forum on corporate accountability, new leadership, new mission statement, and they wanted me there, not as an adversary, as a speaker. I didn't answer right away. I walked home, leaves skittering across the sidewalk, thinking about doors I'd closed and why. Daniel listened as I talked it through, never pushing, never steering. "You don't owe them anything," he said. "I know, but this isn't about them. It might be about finishing something." The forum was held in a neutral venue, not the old headquarters. Still, when I walked into the hall, muscle memory stirred. I felt it in my shoulders, my jaw. Then I reminded myself where I was and who I was now. Elaine greeted me warmly. Richard was not there. The audience was a mix of employees, executives from other firms, students, faces open, expectant. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't tell the whole story. I didn't need to. I spoke about culture, about incentives, about how fear disguises itself as professionalism. I talked about the cost of silence, not just to individuals, but to organizations that slowly rot from the inside. At the end, someone asked the question I'd expected. "If you could go back," they said, "would you do anything differently?" I paused. "I would have trusted myself sooner," I said, "and I would have remembered that no job is worth losing your sense of right and wrong." Afterward, a line formed. Some thanked me, some asked for advice. One man, older, waited until the end. "I was on the board back then," he said quietly. "I didn't speak up." I met his eyes. "You're speaking now." He nodded, swallowing. Sometimes accountability doesn't look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like honesty arriving late but sincere. When I got home, Daniel was waiting with takeout and a soft smile. "How do you feel?" "Lighter," I said, like I set something down I didn't realize I was still carrying. Not everything resolved itself neatly after that. Richard's health declined slowly. News came through Daniel's mother in fragments. When he was hospitalized, Daniel asked me if I wanted to visit. I considered it carefully. Then I said yes. The room was quiet, machines murmuring softly. Richard looked smaller than I remembered, his authority stripped down to frailty. When he saw me, surprise flickered across his face. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know," I replied. We talked about neutral things at first, the weather, the city. Then he looked at me, eyes clear in a way they'd never been before. "I was wrong," he said. Just that. No excuses, no qualifiers. I nodded. "Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness in the storybook sense, but it was real. Enough. He passed a few months later. The funeral was private. Daniel grieved in waves, some obvious, some quiet. I stood beside him, not as a buffer, but as a witness. In the months that followed, Daniel took time off. We traveled. not to escape, but to remember who we were when no one was watching. On a small beach one evening, watching the sun fold itself into the horizon, Daniel said, "I think losing him twice was harder than losing him once." I squeezed his hand. You lost the father you had and the one you hoped he'd be." That understanding didn't erase the pain, but it gave it shape. Back home, life resumed its gentle rhythm. Work, friends, small rituals. The nonprofit board grew. Policies changed. People spoke up sooner. I didn't pretend it was because of me alone, but I knew I'd played a part. One evening, while sorting old files, I found the envelope with the non-compete agreement, the threat that once loomed so large. I read it, then fed it into the shredder, listening to the paper disappear. Power, I'd learned, often relies on you believing it's permanent. It isn't. As the anniversary of that 5-minute meeting came and went, I realized something else had shifted. I no longer marked the day with tension. I marked it with reflection, gratitude, even a quiet pride. Because the truth is, not everyone gets a moment that clear. Not everyone is forced to choose so starkly between who they are and who they're told to be. I did. And every day since, I've lived with the consequences of that choice. Not all of them easy. All of them worth it. After Richard's passing, the world didn't stop. It rarely does. What changed was subtler, like a background noise finally going quiet. For Daniel, grief arrived in layers, some sharp, some dull, all unexpected. For me, it arrived as reflection, not about him alone, but about how much of my life had once been shaped by someone else's shadow. In the months that followed, I noticed how often people confuse closure with forgetting, as if moving on means erasing the past instead of integrating it. I didn't want to forget. I wanted to remember clearly, without flinching. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from Priya. She'd moved overseas, taken a role that challenged her in ways she'd always wanted but never dared to pursue. She wrote about long days, cultural adjustments, and a sense of purpose she hadn't expected. "I almost stayed because it was safe," she wrote. "Thank you for reminding me that safety isn't the same as growth." I folded the letter and placed it in a small box I kept in my desk drawer. Inside were other reminders, notes, emails, a copy of the conference program where I'd first told my story publicly. Not trophies, touchstones. Daniel and I began talking about mentoring younger couples, especially those navigating complicated family dynamics. We didn't position ourselves as experts, we just listened, shared what we'd learned about boundaries, about choosing each other without severing yourself entirely from where you came from. One couple stood out. She worked for her partner's family business, just as I once had. Her eyes flicked to him every time she spoke, seeking approval without realizing it. Afterward, she pulled me aside. "How did you know when it was time to leave?" she asked. I considered the question. "When staying required me to become someone I didn't recognize," I said. She nodded slowly, like something had clicked into place. At work, I was asked to lead a company-wide initiative on ethical escalation, creating clear, protected pathways for employees to raise concerns. It was complex, slow, sometimes frustrating, but it mattered. Each policy drafted felt like laying down guardrails I'd once needed myself. During one workshop, an employee raised his hand. "What if the problem is at the top?" he asked. I didn't sugarcoat it. "Then the risk is higher," I said. "But the truth is still the truth, and systems that can't survive honesty don't deserve loyalty." The room was silent. Then someone nodded, then another. That night, Daniel said, "You know you're changing things in ways you'll never see." I said, "Maybe, but I see enough." The group chat with the 22 had evolved over time. New jobs, new babies, new cities. Sometimes weeks passed without a message. Sometimes someone would drop in with a memory or a win, and we'd all show up like no time had passed at all. On the anniversary of the walkout, Alex posted a photo of an elevator. No caption. I smiled, feeling the echo of that moment without the sting. Life has a way of testing lessons when you least expect it. A year later, my company faced a public relations crisis. A senior leader had ignored repeated warnings about a safety issue. The board was nervous. Lawyers advised caution. Silence was tempting. I remembered the boardroom, the watch, 5 minutes. I spoke up. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't popular, but it was necessary. The issue was addressed. The leader stepped down. No one walked out this time, but many thanked me later for saying what they hadn't known how to say. When I told Daniel, he hugged me tightly. "You didn't freeze," he said. "I don't think I can anymore," I replied. As years passed, the story became something people referenced rather than something I relived. New hires knew it as a kind of legend, a reminder that culture is built in moments of pressure, not mission statements. Sometimes, alone with my thoughts, I wondered what would have happened if Richard had chosen differently that day, if he'd listened, if he'd trusted me. But that line of thinking no longer carried regret, only curiosity. Because here's what I know now. People in power often believe they're protecting something when they silence dissent. What they're really protecting is their own fear, and fear left unchecked will hollow out even the strongest structures. The 5 minutes I was given were meant to diminish me. Instead, they distilled everything I believed into a single choice: stay silent and keep the comfort, or speak and step into uncertainty. I chose uncertainty, and in doing so, I found something far more durable than security. I found myself. There's a strange myth we're taught early on, one that follows us quietly into adulthood, that if you endure long enough, if you keep your head down and do good work, things will eventually reward you with safety, that loyalty is always repaid, that silence is a kind of wisdom. I believed that myth for a long time. I built a life around it. And then, in 5 minutes, it collapsed. What replaced it wasn't certainty, it was something better. Years have passed now, enough time that the sharpness is dulled, enough distance that I can see the whole arc instead of just the fall. When people ask me about that day, because they still do in one form or another, I notice how they lean in. They're rarely asking about the CEO or the scandal or the walkout. They're asking a quieter question underneath it all. What did it cost you, and was it worth it? The honest answer is that it cost me everything I thought defined success: the title, the proximity to power, the illusion of protection that comes with being adjacent to someone important. It cost me comfort, certainty, and a version of family I once hoped I could belong to without conditions. But it gave me something sturdier in return. It gave me self-trust. That's not something you can be handed. It's forged, usually under pressure, usually when the stakes are high enough that pretending becomes impossible. Walking out of that building didn't make me brave overnight. It revealed the bravery that had been suffocating under years of accommodation. I see that now. Daniel and I still talk about that day sometimes, usually when we're reminded of how different our life looks now. Our home is smaller, our circle tighter, our values clearer. We don't chase the same markers of success we once did, not because we couldn't, but because we know better what they cost. He once told me, losing my father's approval hurt, but losing myself would have hurt more. That sentence holds so much of what we learned together. I still work in leadership, still sit in rooms where decisions ripple outward into lives I'll never fully know. That responsibility doesn't scare me anymore. It sobers me. I remember how it feels to be on the receiving end of someone else's unchecked authority. I remember how quickly dignity can be stripped away when it's treated as conditional. So I make different choices. I slow meetings down when someone looks uncomfortable. I ask who hasn't spoken yet. I push for documentation, not to protect myself, but to protect the truth. I refuse urgency when it's used to bypass ethics. And when someone brings me bad news, I thank them before I problem solve. These aren't grand gestures, they're quiet ones, the kind that rarely make headlines, but they change cultures over time. Occasionally, someone will tell me they stayed at a company because of something I said, or that they left one because of something they heard me share. I never tell them what the right choice is. I tell them what it feels like to live with yourself afterward. That's usually enough. The 22 are still part of my life, in ways big and small. Some I speak to weekly, some only on birthdays or anniversaries. But the bond remains, forged in a moment when all of us were asked without warning who we were willing to be. We didn't plan to make a statement, we made a choice. That's an important distinction. I sometimes think about the version of me who walked into that executive conference room, notebook in hand, trusting that reason and history would protect her. I don't judge her. I understand her. She believed in systems because she'd never been taught what to do when systems fail. Now I know. When systems fail, people decide, and those decisions matter far more than policies ever will. If there's a lesson here, it isn't about revenge or victory. It's about alignment, about the quiet power of living in a way that doesn't require you to compartmentalize your values just to survive your day, about recognizing the moment when staying costs more than leaving, even if leaving looks terrifying from the inside. I didn't walk out because I was fearless. I walked out because I finally understood what fear was asking me to give up, and I wasn't willing to pay that price. Today, when I sit at my desk, wherever that desk happens to be, I don't worry about 5-minute ultimatums. I don't wonder if the ground will disappear beneath me without warning, not because it couldn't, but because I know I would land on my feet. That confidence didn't come from power, it came from losing it. So if you're listening to this and you're facing your own moment, your own closed-door meeting, your own quiet ultimatum, I won't promise you it will be easy. It won't. I won't promise you people will understand. Many won't. But I can promise you this. There is life on the other side of integrity. There is community where you least expect it. And sometimes when you're told to leave quietly, the most powerful thing you can do is stand up, walk out with your head high, and trust that the right people will follow. I did, and I would do it again.